I welcome you all to this session. I will be talking about religion and politics in India. As the title itself suggests, this is both a very interesting and a very exciting topic in the study of Indian politics. Why I will explain shortly. In this part of the discussion, I will primarily deal with three basic issues. First, I will try to talk to you about why should we take up religion in any meaningful study of Indian politics. This is more so in view of the fact that India is a self-proclaimed secular state as per the preamble to the Constitution of India amended in 1976. Now, why is it that in a secular country like India, religion becomes such an important issue in the study of political institutions and processes in India? Then I will also try to talk about the general meaning of religion, whether what we mean by religion in its lexical sense is universally applicable to all societies and all countries, or whether religion can have different meanings and implications from one society to another. And the third point that I will try to take up in course of this session will be how far it is practicable for a particular society to completely dissociate religion from politics, whether it is advisable, whether it actually happens in reality in a particular society. And here also we have to look into the differences between the Western countries, which in fact were the pioneers in the process of secularizing politics as a part of their Enlightenment programs, and whether that particular conception of secularism can be applied to all societies, particularly the non-Western societies that we live in, keeping India particularly in mind. Imagine a situation where you have too many religious communities living side by side with their own religious rituals, practices, programs, and also various modes of observance of their religions, and where inter-community relationships might get affected by way of these diversified practices adopted by different religious communities. Who is in fact going to enforce, say, inter-community harmony? How can peace be maintained in an atmosphere which is charged with so many different types of religions existing side by side with their own rituals and practices? You have Eid and the chariot festival, one of the Hindus, the other of the Muslims, almost sort of coinciding, and the state is called upon to maintain peace and order in course of the observance of religious rites and rituals by the practitioners of the two religions. We have at the present moment 82% of the total population of the country sort of embracing Hinduism. About 16% of the total population in fact constitute the followers of Islam. Then we also have the Sikhs, the Christians, the Buddhists, the Jains. Now all these religious communities in fact have their respective faiths to preach, propagate and follow. Some of these religions are proselytizing in nature, some of the religions are not. Some of the religions in fact follow rigorous orthodox practices. Some of the religions might be relatively Catholic and flexible in nature and orientation. Now, given this fact, there must be some sort of, pressures being exerted on the political institutions and practices of the country, be it the question of maintenance of law and order, be it the question of distribution of the various patronages that the state normally delivers to its people, how these are to be sort of distributed among communities which in fact are committed to a whole range of diverse religions. Whether some religious communities feel discriminated against by the way they are treated by the state. These are questions which cannot be escaped. And it is because of this that I think in the study of Indian politics, the factor of religion assumes so much salience. Now, when I say we have to examine the meaning of religion itself, taking the cue from the lexical meaning of the term, we often sort of think that religion in fact is a system of faith or belief that leads to a certain form of worship, and some religious institutions come up to support this system of worship. We have the temples for the Hindus, we have the mosques for the Muslims, we have the gurdwaras for the Sikhs, we have the monasteries for the Buddhists, and so on and so forth. Religion also has a different meaning, particularly in the non-Western world. This lexical meaning of the term religion in fact does not appear to be valid all the time. In the non-Western society, particularly in the Indian context, if we look at the way our traditional saints sort of viewed religion, they did not necessarily mean by it the commitment to a particular form of belief in a deity and a certain form of worship accordingly. By religion, they also meant one's sort of performing certain essential functions in life so as to achieve what they would call liberation. This might sound a bit metaphysical, but it has also some practical aspects to it. By religion, they also would mean that which binds a group of people together in harmonious living, irrespective of their individual beliefs and faiths. This binding aspect of religion, this unifying spirit of religion, in fact, was highlighted time and again by many religious preachers in the non-Western world. They did not only highlight the aspect of division or disunity. They did not only view religion as basically dividing people on the basis of their respective beliefs and faiths. They also meant by religion a way of binding people irrespective of their individual commitments or professions. This is a sense that in fact was initially found in the idea of religion that was developed by social anthropologists who studied primitive societies in order to see how such societies in fact remained integrated, remained intact through the invocation of a certain common symbol or a certain kind of common practices that would unite people and ensure that they do not sort of disintegrate through a process of sort of large-scale individualization. The harmony between individual freedom and collective existence could be ensured through invocation of certain common symbols and adoption of certain common practices. This was the view of religion that was found to be prevalent in most of the traditional primitive societies. Now the question therefore arose as to whether in a more developed modern industrial society we really need to have a religion. This was a question that was raised more or less coinciding with the industrial revolution in the West, the advent of capitalism, which on the one hand denied the significance of religion as a cementing force of society, as it was presumed that with the onset of reason, with reason taking over from blind faith or dogma, there would be no need for such primitive belief. But soon this idea was questioned, as it was found that in the advanced industrial societies also people had to suffer many kinds of anguishes, many kinds of tensions. Societies in fact were found to be on breaking points from time to time. Some sort of a cementing force was considered to be necessary. That is why in fact even sociologists working on post-enlightenment societies of the West could not altogether deny the relevance or the significance of religion as a binding force on society. We have the examples of Durkheim, we have the examples of Max Weber, we have the examples of Marx and Engels, all of whom in fact in their own ways addressed the issue of religion and examined how religion in fact in a different form, in a new avatar, was reappearing on the social scene in order to ensure social harmony and social integration. Now, while this is true in general about religion in both the Western and the non-Western world, interestingly enough, as the West sort of made lots of progress and advances in industrial and technological sense, and it also started sort of encroaching upon the territories and natural resources of the non-Western world through the building up of empires, through colonization. It started giving a different meaning to religion in the context of the non-Western world. They in fact gave us the impression that in the West, with the advent of modern science and technology, they in fact could sort of bring about a process of secularization, which would mean a nearly complete divorce between religion and politics. Render unto Caesar that is Caesar's, render unto God that is God's. This was in fact considered to be a kind of universal principle that was sort of practiced in the Western world after enlightenment, after industrialization, after the advent of the modern capitalist social order. Compared to the West, it was the general impression given by the Western scholars and ideologues that in the non-Western world, religion in fact persisted with all its obscurantism, with all its orthodoxies, with all its superstitions, because it was not sufficiently rational, it was not sufficiently technologically advanced. The non-Western people, in fact, could not reach the state of progress and enlightenment generally found in the West. So there was a kind of hierarchy made in terms of the Western and the non-Western communities. The people belonging to the non-Western world were considered to be inferior, and for them religion in fact stood for only obscurantism, religion stood for orthodoxies, religion stood for everything that was considered to be non-modern or primitive. Now this kind of a binary between the traditional and the modern, between the Western and the non-Western, in fact brought into sharp relief the binary between the secular and the communal. This is the third point that I will be taking up in course of this discussion while referring to the process of secularization. We generally have a tendency to uncritically assume that in the West the process of secularization was almost complete. The West could bring about a secular state, a secular polity. People of the non-Western world, who by and large in fact remained colonized, were unable to bring about this divorce between religion and politics. Now, therefore, secularization as a universal process had to be introduced into the non-Western world as it came to be introduced in the Western world. This was the kind of teaching that was imparted to us by the Western scholars and ideologues who tried to study and analyze the role of religion in most of these non-Western societies, including of course India. Now from this we came across the binary between secularism and communalism. In a country like India, where you have so many religions existing side by side, it was simply not possible to dispense completely with the intervention of religion into political processes. We may take up the instance of Gandhi. Now, Gandhiji in fact would very categorically state that he cannot conceive of politics divorced from religion. It was not that Gandhi was championing only the cause of Hinduism. He was a devout believer in Hinduism, there is no doubt about it. But that would not necessarily turn Gandhi into communal. In fact, he would at the same time equally champion the right of all other religions to stay and to prosper in a multi-religious Indian society of his imagination. He would not be sort of swayed by the artificial notion of a secularism that would entail a complete divorce between religion and politics. He would rather argue that by becoming irreligious or non-religious, one would have all the propensities to indulge in various kinds of unethical, unscrupulous activities. A fact that we in fact these days come across so often when people in the name of religion in fact are committing the worst form of crimes against humanity. We have plenty of such instances in post-colonial, post-independence India. if not also in many of the neighboring countries of India. Now, in view of this, we may argue that the secular communal binary perhaps is a bit misleading insofar as we mean by it the interplay between religion and politics. One may be religious, and as I said at the outset, in India in fact, an overwhelming majority of the people happen to be religious. But by being religious, by observing certain religious rites and rituals, by being an Orthodox Hindu, or by being an Orthodox Muslim or an Orthodox Sikh, one does not by the same token becomes communal. One may be religious and one may remain non-communal till the end of one's life. Nehru initially meant by secularism dharmo-nirapekshata. He in fact was much more enamored of the Western conception of secularism. He didn't have much commitment to religion. But at the fag end of his life, Nehru also realized around 1962, he was writing that perhaps Sarvodharma Samobhava would be a better coinage for understanding the Indian variety of secularism. Now, if we enter into this discussion, it becomes amply clear to us that we cannot sort of go by a universalized meaning of secularism. Rather, we have to interrogate the secular communal binary that we often sort of come across in the ongoing debates and deliberations amongst our scholars and intellectuals. In fact, much of us, because we are all so much influenced by Western scholarship, we often tend to think that we have to define our secularism in the way in which the West understood the meaning of secularism. And therefore, to express any kind of reservations about the term secular, to express discontentment against the term secular is often considered to be a kind of, religious orthodoxy or obscurantism. But this should not be the approach. We should interrogate the meaning of the term secular and communal, and we also have to examine how people remaining attached to particular religious beliefs and faiths can simultaneously practice a non-communal way of life, can sort of contribute to universal humanism. To sum up the discussion, we have to first of all take up the question of the relevance of religion. Why is it that we have to take religion seriously as a subject of study while we look into political institutions and processes of our country? Secondly, we also have to define religion precisely and see whether the meaning that is normally attributed to religion in its Western sense is applicable to non-Western societies like ours, or whether we may mean something different by the term religion. And finally, we also have to interrogate the nature of very complex and tortuous relationship between secularism and communalism as we generally use it in our everyday political rhetorics and practices. This is not something that can be understood in a very simplistic manner. Secularism, in fact, has to be interrogated. It has to be questioned from the point of view of a multi-religious, multicultural society that we have developed in India. And this is more so because of the fact that we have a viable democratic political system where all religious communities, irrespective of their religious identities, are entitled to a set of common rights as citizenship rights. These rights have to be honored, these rights have to be sort of ensured and safeguarded irrespective of one's religious beliefs or faiths.